across the state, whether it's because of infections or because of vaccinations, is still not high enough, that we are concerned about a fourth wave, and we absolutely know that the safety and preventive precautions need to continue.
And that's Washington State Secretary of Health Umair Shah talking about his concerns over COVID immunity rates in our state. As of late April, 30% of Washingtonians have been fully vaccinated. How's that going to change in the weeks ahead? What's going to happen when several counties likely roll back to phase 2 as we try to fully reopen our state and get back to normal? Well, we're discussing that. We're discussing what the Seattle City Council is going to do with American Rescue Plan Act funding and so much more. It's all right here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. Brian Callanan here with you. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. My co-host, see if you can figure out his name using this anagram. Vehicles, kind of. Okay, scramble those letters there, and then go. Aha! It's Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight. Kevin, good to see it. Nothing like a good anagram,
figured out
right?
my secret. You figured out my secret.
I put it through. I put it through an anagram generator. This is what I do in my spare time. My name only came up with Cannibal Narla, so I got to work on that one.
You got a lot of spare time.
I know, yeah. Sad but true. Sad but true. Thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Please support them and other small businesses too. Thanks also to our patrons. Kevin V boosted up his monthly pledge this week. Thank you, sir. We have a Seattle News, Views, and Brews coffee mug heading your way. Make sure you get one of these beauties. And also another mug will go to Jewel, who just joined us at the $10 level. Thanks so much, Jewel, for doing that. Please give at whatever level you can, folks. We really appreciate it. We're encouraging $10 a month for these high quality mugs. So give if you can here. Whatever you can give is surely appreciated. Our mugshot of the week comes from the studios of Converge Media. Trey Holiday. I got to spend some time with her filling in as a co-host last week for Omari Salisbury. Here's to you, Trey. And folks, I can't promise you will get to meet the lovely and talented Trey Holiday if you support the show, but you can get a really cool mug. So please do help us out on Patreon. And thanks always to Converge Media, which runs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get rolling with right here, right now. Kevin, something we are bracing for in King County, a return to phase 2 in our state's multi-phase reopening plan. We are recording the show before the governor's announcement on May 3rd or 4th. There's an indication the state may push this by a day to get the latest information, but the numbers overall do not look great. So we're supposed to stay under this 200 cases per 1,000 residents, 100,000 residents. King County was up over the 229 mark in late April. We're also supposed to have under 5 hospitalizations per 100,000 residents. King County is up at about 5.5. So Kevin, we've seen a lot of people.
As of last Friday, I'm looking at the numbers right now from King County Public Health. New COVID cases, as you mentioned, supposed to stay under 200 to stay in phase 3. We're at 241.
Oh, wow. That went up.
Per 100,000. And hospitalizations, which, lags new cases by 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
We have to stay under 5, and we're at 5.8.
Yeah.
So, the
trends
official
call
is going to be on May 3rd.
Yeah.
And, it is not, unless a miracle happens, King County is headed back to phase 2.
Yeah, that is not news anybody wants to hear. And in looking at this, at the end of April, more than 5 million vaccine doses have been administered in our state. 40% of us have received at least one dose. I know Kevin and I will be getting our second doses this week, which is awesome. But I've heard a few cases where demand for the vaccine, Kevin, is starting to waver. Some Seattle vaccine locations now saying, just come on down. You don't even need an appointment. I'm trying to figure out, what does our city, what does our state really need to do to get these vaccinations higher? Setting up the delivery system for vaccines was one part of it, and that was a big task, but it seems to be an even bigger task just getting more people to get a shot.
Yeah, I think there are a few things going on here. One is, I imagine, I'm expecting, is just simply logistics. It's like people have to work, right? And getting to one of these sites to get a vaccination, let alone if you have to go twice, is pretty complicated. In fact, we're hearing a lot of people getting the first shot and then don't get the second shot.
They don't even do it. Yeah,
that sort of leads a little bit to one of the second reasons I think is going on here, which is that there's been a lot of, people saying, wow, the side effects from the second dose
are really
bad.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not looking forward to that. But, first of all, not everybody has really bad
Bad
side
side
effects from
effects.
from
True.
the second
Yeah.
dose. And second of all, as bad as side effects might be for some folks, it's still way better than getting COVID. It is
I see it
way,
the
way
same
better
way.
than getting
I see it the
COVID.
same way. And
And then,
yeah.
and then the third is there's still misinformation out there about the vaccines, right?
Yeah.
So we've got a bunch of work to do
Mm-hmm.
to get to herd immunity, but we really need to do that. If we want to get out of this whole phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 thing and
Yeah.
really get back to normal life, we're going to have to get 70% or more of the population, right?
That's the number we've heard. We're not even halfway there. Yeah.
And since right now vaccines aren't even been approved for kids, right?
Right.
The the bar we have to meet for the adult population is even higher.
Yeah.
So
right.
I think we're gonna need a culture change, right? Where it's really about all of us, as much as we don't like putting pressure on other people. That's not kind of the Seattle way.
Sure.
We're gonna have to put a bunch of pressure on other people to get where we need to go on this, right?
Well,
the vaccines are safe.
Yeah.
And they're helping us. We can see very clearly in the number of deaths and the fatality rate of COVID. It has dropped. It has just plummeted, which is super, super good news. And that's really about the vaccinations. Right?
Yeah. And very effective too. I know some of the latest numbers from the CDC about that are showing really effective rates in terms of people not getting COVID again after they get the vaccine or whatever else. So a lot of work there.
Latest studies are showing that getting vaccinated does in fact in many cases prevent you from transmitting COVID,
which is a key part. You don't want to be that unwitting transmitter there. I did want to check in on one piece here though, Kevin. There's actually some new incentives coming down from the state such that you want to go to a sporting event, concerts, cruise, things along those lines. The governor's been talking about this too. If you get fully vaccinated, then you can go to these events. It's almost like this vaccine passport thing, which I know has gotten some different talk about it around the country here, but let me know about that. It really looks like the governor is trying to incorporate some different incentives to get people vaccinated more quickly, I guess.
Yeah, again, we have to create a culture of this, and a desire to really get life back to normal again, right? We're on we're on a kind of a slow path to get back to normal at the moment. Yeah. And that really needs to change.
Yeah, got to speed up. I want to move on to a related topic here, if I could, Kevin. A public hearing this week for the Seattle City Council on how the city should be spending federal money from the American Rescue Plan Act. So Seattle's going to get about $239 million from ARPA and the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. The first half of that money, $119 million, comes in this year, the second half next year. So, Kevin, just looking back over the last couple of weeks, I know that $18 million COVID relief package the council passed last week focused on food access, childcare, vaccine outreach, things of that nature. But this is a bigger chunk of change we're talking about here. And I'm trying to figure out, where do you think this ARPA money is going to go? And what are we going to hear at this public hearing?
Yeah, I think, let's answer those questions in reverse order. I think what we're going to hear at the public hearing is a bunch of, citizens and residents talking about their kind of lived experience over last year and losing their jobs, losing their businesses and things like that. And we're also going to hear from, community-based organizations who've really been struggling for funding. A lot of what that $18 million went to, it was sort of the last of the CARES Act funding from last fall, is to extend a lot of programs that the city funded through June through the rest of the year. Yeah. But then with this new tranche of money that's coming in, I think a lot is going to go towards rent assistance. I think a lot's going to go toward rent assistance and landlord assistance, right? Because there's a lot of back rent due right now. Right? And at some point when the eviction moratorium is lifted,
there's a lot of June 30th right now, but who knows?
That there's just going to be this tidal wave of evictions that come out after that. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. I think a fair amount is going to go into housing programs and homeless programs.
I was going to ask you about that.
Right. And a lot's going to go into small business support. But I think one of the things that they'll really need to struggle with, and it's something I wrote about sort of a couple of weeks back, was what do we need to do to revive downtown?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To make downtown a place that people want to go back to, that people want to go back to their jobs there, that retail stores, will open there because, if you walk around downtown, there's a lot of boarded up windows. There's a lot of closed stores and
Yeah.
empty storefronts there, right? It is not thriving now.
No.
And, we can magically hand wave and say, gosh, if we do these other things, it'll just all
Yeah.
come back. But I think somebody needs to sit down and come up with a plan that says, what do we really have to do? Proactively to make sure downtown recovers faster.
Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of those businesses, certainly I've heard it about a number of the restaurants downtown, they're closed down and they're not opening back up again. I mean, that's a difficult business to be in, even when you're not in the middle of a pandemic. And when you see those shut down, I think there is a long lasting effect about that. Let me just bring in that other piece there. You mentioned homeless funding, Kevin. I think it's really interesting because King County just unveiled this plan to add some more shelter beds using some federal funding to bring 500 more people inside, as Executive Dow Constantine is talking about. And I look at this and I look at the Compassion Seattle Charter Amendment, which is really trying to set some different standards for those dollars that the city would invest in homeless services there. I wonder, in looking at that, if local leaders like the county, for sure, is kind of already responding to Compassion Seattle here in a way. This idea of funneling more of these federal funds into homeless services, is that going to be part of the answer in terms of rebuilding downtown, et cetera?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting as to whether it's a question of short-term response or long-term response.
Right. And how long is that? How sustainable is this federal funding?
Yeah, we can. There's a shelter surge going on right now.
Right. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
And a big part of that, in the context of the pandemic, has been how do we do non-congregate shelters?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where we can really create a big separation, and that's why they've been focusing so much on hoteling. In fact. Part of the what we expect to hear about in this upcoming council committee meeting on the shelter surge strategy is to hear about their plans for opening up a third hotel,
right,
to house the homeless. And this ties back to some of the other things we're talking about related to how do we help downtown revive. Got a lot of encampments on the streets of downtown. Right? And for a lot of people, that makes them feel unsafe there, whether, that's really accurate, depiction of the safety level or not.
Sure.
Putting that debate aside, it makes some people feel not quite so safe going downtown.
Right.
So if we can get some of the folks who are living in tents on the streets downtown into better places. Right. Getting them a hotel room where they can really start to stabilize their lives and move them from there on to a better place and get them case management and other services they need, then that's a twofer, right? We win in a couple of different ways by doing that. But is that sort of a long-term sustainable thing? If they're spending this
federal funding,
federal ARPA funding to fund these programs, right? That's one-time funding, or maybe two-time. I mean, you can think of it, I guess, as two-time funding, right? With the two tranches of this, but but then what happens beyond that? Right?
And that's the big question. Sure.
Right. So we got to, we have to really think about kind of what the longer-term plan is for homeless sheltering, for creating more permanent supportive housing. Right. And I think one of the differences between to the point you were making about, is this kind of response to the Compassion Seattle proposal for a charter amendment? What the Compassion Seattle folks were trying to do was say, look, what's really going to help solve this problem, rather than just kind of like eke away a little bit, right? And they said, look, we're going to need 2,000 more permanent supportive housing. Right. And or I suppose permanent supportive housing and
emergency housing.
And that will probably deliver about half of what we need. To solve the problem. We figured there's about 3,800 people sort of chronically homeless living on the streets of Seattle right now. So 2,000 would give us half of that. What King County has said, and King County, altogether has about somewhere between 3 and 4 times the homeless population that Seattle alone has. They just said, we're going to do another 500 beds, which is kind of more of the same of, well, okay, we found a bit more money, let's do a bit more. Right. And it's not really solving the problem.
No. I wonder how that health through housing program from King County is going to play into this into the future, because that's a program that's also talking about building 2,000 units or whatever else. So I think there's a lot of interplay with those different issues. And I will say, folks, just did a piece I did on Seattle Channel with Compassion Seattle, a really good debate involving Downtown Seattle Association, Uplift Northwest, Real Change. Got a little spicy there, so make sure you check that out on Seattle Channel. I want to keep talking about the homelessness issue with you, Kevin, as we move into our next segment here. Now hear this. An important city council meeting coming up this week. Kevin alluded to this earlier. The Select Committee on Homelessness Strategies and Investments. They're talking about a process that has been through a number of delays, bringing more hotels online to help house homeless people. Here's what Councilmember Andrew Lewis, who heads up the committee, said about this last week.
Particularly the shelter surge policy through the Executive Pacific Hotel and the King's Inn, and hopefully, knock on wood, a third hotel by the time that committee convenes, or at least a plan for a third hotel.
Kevin, this shelter surge idea of building out hotel capacity to help homeless people was in the works 6 months ago, basically, and it's taken a lot of time to develop. The mayor has a plan, or she put out a plan at that point, to create 300 more shelter beds using hotels and 125 units of more traditional shelter. As it stands right now, in between the Executive Pacific and the King's Inn, there are now over 200 hotel beds provided. But what's it going to take to make this full shelter surge a reality, and why is it taking so long?
Well, as you're talking about a few minutes ago, just in terms of what it's going to take to make it a reality, it's going to take money.
Yeah,
but this isn't the complete solution, right?
Yep.
This is not going to get all of Seattle's or King County's homeless off our streets,
right?
And get them into better places. It's going to do, it's incremental. It's going to do a little bit more, which will help a little bit more. But, it would take a lot more money and a lot more logistics and a lot more community-based organizations. It's not clear at this point we really have the capacity to do that. And this is something that, Mayor Durkin has said several times. It's like, we don't have the money. We don't actually have the capacity to fully do this. So we're incrementally adding pieces as we can. I think we can layer on top of that, the pandemic response, right?
Sure.
In the early days of the pandemic, we actually had to essentially reduce our capacity in homeless shelters because we had to create more physical separation between them. Right? There's just less space in the places that we had. Adding hoteling, while super expensive, has helped add some of that capacity back. So at least we're not, we're not, at a deficit from where we were before the pandemic started. But we're still nowhere near close to actually solving this problem. So we would need a lot more money. We'd need a lot more capacity and logistics to be able to sort of really address this. But at the same time, you could also say every little bit helps.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. I just worry, and I know the council has been back and forth with the mayor about this too, about why this has taken 6 months to get this kind of up to speed, when really the bulk of the issues we've been seeing with COVID, I know we're still going through them now, but a lot of those were around the turn of the year in December and January. That's when you really needed the shelter, and they didn't have this surge in place at that point. I think there's still some concern about that.
Well, and some things have changed over last year around this, right? They start out with hoteling by contracting for a bunch of hotel rooms. In fact, the place they started with all that was they contracted a whole bunch of hotel rooms so that city employees, essential city employees,
frontline workers,
who were frontline workers who were potentially exposed to COVID, had a place where they could where they could physically isolate if they needed to. While
not too many city employees did that, though. We didn't get too many.
And so the city ended up paying upfront for a lot of hotel rooms that didn't get used. And in fact, the whole push towards hoteling started with a lot of people saying, "Well, why aren't we using the space we have for this other thing that would really, really help?" And it ended up sort of being a thing in its own, which is in a lot of ways really turned out to be a best practice when you can afford it for stabilizing unsheltered people on the streets of our city, right? But the expense is high, so the expense has been one of the reasons it's been taking so long. Getting contracts with hotels
not easy
has been another problem, as particularly as the hotel business has started to pick up again. Months ago, when nobody was staying in hotels, it was a lot easier to get a contract with that. Not quite as easy, right? So and getting those contracts for as long as we think the city thinks it's going to need them,
Yeah.
is also a bit of a problem. So
Yeah.
a lot of the questions and the details and logistics of what they actually need to contract for has changed. And now, one of the things the city is looking for is there are some hotels that have gone under over the last year.
Right. So
and
why
they might
not?
be really good, if we're committed long-term to this, practice of hoteling as a way to, essentially create shelter space that's really in a lot of ways the best practice for stabilizing homeless individuals.
It's proven to
Should
be
the
that,
city and the county be buying up some of those shut down hotels?
Right.
And I think we're probably going to see some more of that.
Yeah, I know the mayor had talked about, well, let's start this with a 2-month ramp up and have them use these hotels and then 2-month ramp down. So I don't know about that permanent piece of it, at least from the mayor's perspective here, but it is something we're going to have to watch.
My personal bet is I think the city and the county are going to end up buying some hotels and using, in fact, potentially using some of the ARPA funding to buy some of these hotels. Yeah. And then using them basically as the next generation of homeless shelter.
Yeah. It's a lot of that. So much of this is going towards that piece, Kevin, when we talk about non-congregate housing for homeless people. And it's a safer way. It's a more dignified way to approach the problem. So I think that's one of the lessons learned from COVID, to be sure. I should point out also, Councilmember Lewis is also this week going to be talking about adding in some street sinks. This is something that the council worked on last year during the budget. This is running water so people in the street can use it for hand washing, hygiene there. Another discussion that's been going on for a little while, but I do need to move on to another piece here, Kevin. And I got to say, it would not be a podcast if we did not talk about Councilmember Shama Sawant. We are recording this show as an announcement about the recall petition she is facing, and a timeline for signature gatherers is coming down from Superior Court Judge Jim Rogers. The judge is deciding when that 180-day clock to gather signatures will end. There was some legal wrangling over this, both sides arguing over the ballot synopsis. But Kevin, I wanted to be more specific about the timeline ahead here, because the recall supporters have said in the past they want to be on the August ballot, and that's looking almost impossible right now. I was talking with King County Elections about this before the show. They told me it would take about 2 to 4 weeks to validate signatures. They try to get it done as soon as they could. And once that validation is complete, the election has to be held between 45 and 90 days after that, but not between the primary and the general election. So that's the different mileposts we're dealing with right here. So that validation, as I'm looking at it here, would basically need to happen by the end of May to get on that August ballot, meaning signatures would basically have to be in right now, or what are you taking out of this?
I think there's going to be some interesting decisions by judges about how to interpret these conflicting rules. And this is, one more case of the Sawant recall kind of testing the legal waters on some of these really boundary conditions. The issue that you talked about sort of at the beginning about sort of when to 180 days, right? When do they start and finish? Is all about an ambiguity in the state law.
Yes, right.
Whether about what it says there's you get if the Superior Court judge decides on certifying the recall petition and it's not appealed, then the petitioners get 16 days to put their petition together and then 100 days to do signature gathering. If it does go to the Supreme Court and they rule on it and say, yep, okay, thumbs up on the petition,
right,
then they get 180 days, right? They don't get that extra 16 days because they had that time while the Supreme Court was
right.
But what the state law doesn't say is what happens if the Supreme Court sends it back down to the Superior Court to make some modifications to the ballot. Is it 16 days plus 180 days?
Right.
Is it 180 days from the day that the Supreme Court ruled? So there's an ambiguity there, and there's another ambiguity here where it says needs to be between 45 and 90 days, but there are restrictions about whether they can happen between the primary and the general election. Right. So what happens, and in the case that it looks very likely is going to happen now, which is they're going to get their signatures together, but it would probably end up landing in between those two. Unless they decide to really hold on to them and not file them until after the August ballot happens.
It's so fraught here. It's just interesting to me to see how this goes. And we're working on a story about this on Seattle Channel, folks. Organizers are they're not 100% sure they're going to make that November ballot either, because there's a lot of work that has to go into signature gathering, especially in the age of COVID, Kevin, because as I understand it, they're sending out mailers to people in the District 3 area and getting those petitions back. And so that's a process that has to happen there. And just looking at this in the weeks and months ahead, I don't know, it could be a special election in December. It could be in January. Do you even want to be on that November ballot? Because it would bring out a lot of people. Do the organizers of this want that to happen? It's a really fraught issue here.
Yeah. And, it's a little hard to predict how it would turn out.
Yeah,
we don't
true.
have district-based elections this year. We only have city-based positions.
Yep.
And the Sawant recall would only be District 3.
District 3, that's right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if there were other things that drew out District 3 voters besides the city-based,
Sure.
certainly the city-based elections for mayor and for
Yep.
city-based city council positions are likely to draw a lot of District 3 voters out.
Yeah,
But
crowded ballot.
But would they come out for this alone?
Mm-hmm.
Would your supporters come out stronger? Would the people
Sure.
who support the recall come out stronger?
Mm-hmm.
It's super hard to handicap how
Yeah.
this particular thing would come out if it ended up on the November ballot.
Yeah, I really see Compassion Seattle as being a real bellwether for this. If that indeed makes the November ballot, as many people expect it will, who's going to align with that? Who's not going to align with that? How's that going to affect how things come through? Because I wanted to point out,
but again, the Sawant thing is
it's
just District 3.
I know, but
right?
you're absolutely right. But in terms of how people come out, does she come out against it or whatever else? I would imagine that she would. I'd love to see how that plays out. And I've just seen it with a few of the different candidates that have come through, Kevin, in looking at, we have a new city attorney candidate out there, Steve Fortney, former Microsoft attorney, already aligning himself very specifically with the Compassion Seattle camp. So I think we're going to see some different alliances start to form here in the months ahead. Would you think so?
I would be shocked if any of the city council members came out in favor of Compassion, because basically it's going to tie their hands.
Yeah, right.
As the 9 city legislators, are any of them going to want to be told,
where to spend
by a change to the city charter, exactly how they have to fund and manage the homeless situation? No, they're
just
not.
the fact that there's a campaign pushing for that is an indication of what people think of the job they're doing. But keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. All the polls have been saying for the last couple of years that the approval rate of the city council is just in the tank. It is absolutely terrible.
Right.
And the fact, again, to your point, that the fact that this is even being considered is one more sign of that. But at the same time, the city council members, I would expect all 9 of them. I haven't talked to any of them specifically about it.
Yeah.
I would expect all 9 to push back real hard. This would tie their hands on what they can do.
Yeah, the signature gathering for Compassion Seattle basically going on in the next few days. So we'll keep an eye on that. And thank you for that insight there, Kevin. We're going to move on to our final segment here. What's next? Kevin, I always like to highlight the work you're doing on SCC Insight that you won't really see anywhere else. You looked into candidate Brianna Thomas. She's running for a citywide position 9 on the city council. Thomas is chief of staff for the current position 9 holder, Lorena Gonzalez, who's running for mayor. You researched Thomas's financial disclosure forms and found what raises some questions for you about a possible conflict of interest. What did you find? I want to talk about this. And what are some of the larger issues here with regard to Seattle's Ethics and Elections Commission?
Right. So, as you mentioned, Brianna Thomas is chief of staff to Lorena Gonzalez, who is the current council president.
Right.
And Thomas has worked for Gonzalez basically since the first day she took office in 2015, all the way through. Thomas, in 2014, became the vice president and secretary of the board of Working Washington.
Right.
Which is
lobbying
really
group.
over the last few years has become a powerhouse local political organization. They're
Sure.
a 501c4 political organization, officially registered. They have 3 registered
Seattle
lobbyists.
News, Views, and Brews
the city
is an
who
independent
lobbied the city on
production
a bunch
of Callahan
labor-related
Media
issues.
Services.
Right.
Copyright
They were also
2021.
the organizing force behind CAPE.
Yeah.
The political arch
Arm
rival
of the
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callahan Media Services. Copyright 2021.
Yeah.
They also have a 501c3 sister organization that they manage that takes funding from the city
Right.
for labor, labor training programs, labor sort of relations programs to educate workers on their rights.
Right. So you
So
saw this as a
involved.
conflict. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
they actively lobbied the city council on a number of labor-related issues, including they've lobbied Breonna Thomas in a role and Council President Gonzalez on it, and a number of other city council members directly on it. So so this certainly presents a pretty obvious conflict of interest, particularly since in Council President Gonzalez's office, Thomas is responsible for labor-related issues, right? So, so there is a direct overlap in the issues that Working Washington lobbies the city, including city council, over, and what Thomas works on official responsibilities.
Sure.
And the city employee ethics code.
Yeah, right. You looked into this part too. Yeah.
Yeah, it says that. And certainly the way it's interpreted is that just that status alone is not officially illegal.
Right.
Thomas would actually have to take actions where a reasonable person looking at the situation would say, her judgment is clouded because of this conflict.
But someone would have to call her on it too. That's the other piece.
And someone has to call it officially. In those cases, she is supposed to disclose it to the executive director of the Seattle Ethics and Elections Commission.
And she's disclosed her relationship. Yeah.
And to her boss. She disclosed the relationship. She's supposed to disclose that again every time one of these actions takes place.
Yeah.
Again, it's not the status, it's specific actions, which would be illegal.
Yeah.
It's not clear she's done that. She definitely disclosed the status and talked about that with the executive director of the Ethics Commission. This. It's not clear that she, he told me that he has no recollection of her actually disclosing specific actions. Although, again, Working Washington, the Seattle City Council visitor logs say they met with her. They met with Council President Gonzalez. So there are potential actions that happened that should have been disclosed and probably didn't happen. But technical violations that she made are not really the issue here. The issue here is, there's a 5+ year standing conflict of interest, right? And nobody's said anything about it for 5 years about this, right? And apparently everybody just thinks this is okay.
Yeah.
Right? And it raises issues about, so she's on the board of Working Washington. Everybody thinks that's okay. That's an organization that's aligned very closely with, our basically one-party government.
Yeah, right.
City,
okay.
Right. If she were on the board of the Chamber of Commerce,
that
would be unthinkable, right?
Right.
Absolutely unthinkable for the council president's chief of staff to be on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, the organization running case.
Yeah, right.
But their political arch rival,
yeah,
nobody said a word for 5 years about that.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that really points to, the ethics issues and it's kind of sort of the atmosphere and culture of kind of casual laziness around these things, right? Yeah. Where, to the point that you made, somebody has to call you on this, right? And
nobody
you only really have to disclose this stuff if somebody might object.
Right.
Otherwise, it's like, if you're conflicts with an organization that people think, is okay, we like that organization, then who really cares?
Yeah.
And by the official rules, if she discloses it and within a week, Council President Gonzalez doesn't say, hey, that's not okay, then it's fine.
Right.
So if she discloses that, I'm doing this thing where there's an apparent conflict of interest, and Council President Gonzalez, for whatever reason, either doesn't respond or says, it's fine.
Yeah.
Then it's legal.
Yeah.
Right. Regardless of how it looks.
Now, Thomas has actually cut ties with Working Washington as she's become a candidate here. So that's going to be, it'll be an interesting question for her going forward. And, or maybe it won't be. We'll see how she progresses through as the elections go through here. But thank you for that deep dive.
Her opponents. We'll see what her opponents in the election think.
Yeah. Indeed, we will. All right, well, let's lighten things up here, shall we? I always like to wrap up the show with some of the delicious things to have on your coffee break, and I lean heavily on Kevin's mastery of all things baking for this segment. And Kevin, today it is the return of the chocolate caramel bar. Look out, I almost dropped that thing. But this is something that my daughters create here, sort of along the line of a magic cookie, if you will. No coconut on this thing, however. It brought up an interesting argument in our house here, a debate. We have spirited debates about all things baking here. Is it tougher to make cookies or bars? Because with cookies, you kind of check them out in the oven. They're sort of individually cruising along there. But a pan full of bars is a little bit different. Your take on this, Kevin? I know you've baked both of these things. Which is more challenging, cookies or bars? What do you think?
Well, anything that has a thickness, right?
Yes. Okay.
It's hard to know what's going on in the middle.
Yeah. Right.
And that,
this is the toothpicks and all that. Yeah.
Roasting turkey at Thanksgiving,
okay.
or, bars or lasagna,
Sure.
anything, right? Anything's got a thickness. What's going on in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you got a good thermometer, if you got a good thermometer you can you can go in and test it and see, like, with cake, that's the issue with cake and bread as well, right? Is it done? Well, it's done if it's thoroughly baked in the middle.
Right.
So, people with bread, they say, you flip it over and you tap the bottom. Does it sound hollow?
Yes. Right.
Well, what's the standard for does it sound hollow?
Oh man, I wish I could tell you. I got nothing.
All the British baking fans out there have all watched Paul Hollywood, tear into that bread and poke it and say, it's underproved.
Too right. Yeah. Right.
It's raw in the middle.
Right.
And you can have that issue with the bars as well. Yeah. Right. But I mean, the nice thing about baking desserts like that, especially sugary kinds of things, is you can check.
There's a lot of leeway,
right?
Yeah.
You can. Yeah, there's a lot of leeway. You might think gooey is good. But just being able to stick the thermometer there and say, is it the temperature you want it to be in the middle? It's a little harder to do with bread than it is with a bar when it's only like an inch and a half, maybe 2 inches thick.
Oh man, that is definitely gooey. What I'm crunching into there. Wow,
but is it good?
It's awesome. Good? That's the problem. It doesn't matter that it's a little underbaked. It's really good.
Then you also have to think about, are there any ingredients that you really do have to cook, right? Flour at some level, there is bacteria in flour, so you have to make sure that you bake it to a certain level to kill off the bacteria. And if you got eggs in there, then you have to worry about that. But like chocolate, sugar, things like that, it's like you can eat them raw.
That'll work.
You can eat them cooked. It's like, so you have to think about, like, does it really matter if it's fully cooked or not?
Indeed. These are the questions that always vex us here. And Kevin, I always thank you for turning up the temperature on these debates. I appreciate it, man. As always. And thanks
always
also to you do what you do, my man. Thanks also to our patrons. Please do support us on Patreon at any level you can. We really do appreciate you powering our show here. Thanks to everyone for listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. Again, please do become a patron on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We really could use your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media 2. We will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.